What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. These days there is loud claims saying that Russia's economy has not only weathered the war, but even found new sources of strength. Official propaganda insists the nation's treasury is overflowing, that sanctions are backfiring, and that citizens are receiving hidden rewards from this prolonged conflict. If you ask any single one of them, however, what kind of rewards they got by invading Ukraine, not too many will be able to truthfully answer this question. For some reason. But if you take a closer look, this narrative begins to crumble. Behind the boast of limitless funds lies a colossal pile of corporate debt, budgetary deficit, and a government that's resorting to desperate measures to cover war expenses. Yesterday, guys, we spoke about the regime of Putin thinking about freezing some of people's savings and converting them into war bonds, making those people involuntarily supporters of the war. But as of recently, the Central Bank of Russia unambiguously hinted, pretty much confirming, that the regime already started tapping into people's reserves without them knowing. It is a sophisticated scheme and it is not so obvious, but the fact is the fact. Putin started stealing money from his people in order to sustain the invasion. So today, let's talk about how Russia keeps pouring money into this bottomless pit, why the real costs of the war are skyrocketing, and how this illusory economic resilience could push the country to a tipping point. This is the story of thousands of tanks, countless rubles, and an entire propaganda narrative that are all intertwined into a dizzying dance of deception that is as reckless as expensive. Wow, this was very poetic. From the very beginning, the Kremlin's war expansion far exceeded anything the official defense budget could accommodate. Announcements of billions of rubles in special operations were just the tip of an iceberg, too big to fit in any tidy accounting ledger. After all, these sums did not include regional bonuses to new recruits or the bankrolled incentives to tempt impoverished regions into the ranks. Nor did they factor in the billion rubles deals used to keep factories churning out ammunition, tanks and drones on short notice. Even routine maintenance costs like hiring new rail workers when their predecessors vanished into the combat zone often went unacknowledged, despite being a direct result of the conflict. As you can see, the cost of Putin's invasion is far greater than what it is originally declared. Even Russia's military budget of 13.5 trillion rubles for 2025, even though it seems like a very big number, is actually just a part of the real price. That's also assuming we believe the official number, which most likely is also lowered, so that the people do not feel worried that so much money goes towards this small special military operation. Everything from destroyed old depots to the half-legal shipping of sanctioned goods piles on top of the government's already staggering expenses. Russia's leadership tried to conceal these outlays behind allegedly resilient finances. But war money does not just vanish into thin air, besides obviously setting in Putin's friends and oligarchs' pockets. The real number is not only colossal but also bound to keep growing, especially as older stockpiles are depleted and more advanced hardware must be built from scratch. For a while it all looked sustainable, at least on paper, and many Russians were drawn into believing that the government had found a magical funding source that never runs dry. Yet, 1 ruble spent on war requires another ruble somewhere else to fill in the holes it leaves behind. And unlike investments in education or infrastructure, where social dividends eventually show up in the future, these war rubles generate neither prosperity nor innovation. They are poured into a self-destructive venture, leaving behind vacancies at home, debts that can be repaid, and families forced to pick up the pieces when their husbands or fathers do not return. Few things are as brutal as the cycle of recruiting people, sending them to the front, then figuring out the way to pay them if they survive, or offering death bonuses if they don't. And almost forgot $30,000 average sign-up bonuses for just bringing the person into the military, whether it is a heartbroken 18-year-old boy who never held a gun in his hands, or a middle-aged war veteran experienced in multiple combats. Sign here, receive $30,000, no questions asked. At first, there were genuine believers, men who fancied themselves defenders of the motherland, or who were simply desperate to earn far more than the usual salaries. But that pool dried up quickly. Soon enough, the pay packages got bigger and bigger, morphing into a grim auction for human lives. Recruits signed contracts for sums they never imagined making in such a short period of time, only to discover it is rarely enough to justify the crushing realities of the battlefield. One thing is to watch military movies about wartime heroes and get inspired how easy it is to fight and return back home hero. Another thing is when you just sit in a trench in ice-cold mud and then suddenly, out of nowhere, drone lands, crippling you for the rest of your life. You come back home, nobody cherishes you as a liberator, the infrastructure is not prepared for people in wheelchairs, and you are in 24/7 battles with bureaucrats trying to prove that you got injured in the zone of the special military operation and not 100 meters away from it, which apparently disqualifies you from receiving these disability payments. Meanwhile, the government struggles to keep the illusion of endless funds alive by offloading more costs to regional budgets or turning to so-called preferential loans. These loans carry lower interest rates for defense contractors, but the banks handing over that money are not doing it from the goodness of their hearts. They expect to be repaid, either by the federal government or some hidden channel. Yet, the state cannot simply siphon unlimited funds into these banks without fueling more inflation or wrecking its own balance sheet. I guess I pronounced this word incorrectly, but you get the idea. English, right? Even the so-called preferential loans are completely counterproductive. The reason why the central bank establishes such high interest rates is to lower the circulation of money in the system and fight inflation. But when loans continue to be given out under preferential rates, twice lower or more than they should be, it defeats the entire purpose of the entire financial exercise. So, the Russian leadership chooses to shuffle the debts around, eventually. At each step, it's like a theater performance. The war machine marches on, the paychecks keep flowing, and new volunteers believe, at least momentarily, that it is all doable. But the truth is harsh. Every destroyed tank devours rubles that took months to gather. Each lost soldier leaves behind a household that will need state support for years to come. This is not the kind of spending that yields highways, universities, research, developments, or advanced industries. It is a vicious cycle of depletion, funded by loans that grow more dangerous with every day passing. For a while, many foreign observers were left scratching their heads. How could Russia endure crippling sanctions, burn through old Soviet gear, and still keep spitting out fresh artillery, missiles, and drones? Some experts attributed to adept propaganda, while others suspected secret deals with countries like Iran or North Korea. In reality, it is a combination of both. And then, in addition to that, there is a simple grand trick that involves staggering off-budget financing. Craig Kennedy, a former investment banker, brought a spotlight on the shady labyrinth of corporate debt fueling this war. According to his findings, the amount of money borrowed by defense contractors with poor credit soared beyond any official estimates. This debt, disguised as a routine corporate lending, effectively doubles the costs the Kremlin is willing to acknowledge. And once you add in the cost of layering each transaction through middlemen to dodge sanctions, you are well staring at a colossal sinkhole. There is no real plan to service this debt either. Sooner or later, the government must figure out how to bail out these contractors or risk letting the banking system collapse under a mountain of defaults. Naturally, this means biting off a chunk of the federal budget, but that same budget is already under pressure from war-related payouts, inflation, and lower oil revenues. It is a very fragile balancing act. Keep the illusions alive just long enough to demoralize Ukraine's supporters, who might think, if Russia is full of cash and arms, why even bother draining our own treasuries for stalemate? That's exactly the message the Kremlin wants them to swallow. But illusions are fleeting. Eventually, numbers on the ledger stop making sense if the real economy cannot keep up. And you know what? It no longer does. These numbers no longer make sense. Economists and analysts already see that all the conventional methods of fueling the Russian treasury are no longer effective. Yet, money keeps flowing, somewhat. So they started carefully analyzing the hints that the biggest financial wizards of Russia are giving them, just to find out that one of the biggest robberies of common people has already started. It is not obvious yet, and people still see exactly the same numbers on their bank accounts as they saw the day before. but the siphoning has already started. Each bank is obliged to keep a certain level of reserves to prevent it from unexpected collapse, in case clients start to pull all their money at once. This reserve is said to be just in cash, untouched, laying there doing nothing. That's why it is a reserve. It's some kind of an emergency fund if you think about it. And when Putin's administration saw a huge pile of cash laying there doing nothing, what was the first thing they did? Exactly. They grabbed as much as the money as they could, not too much at first, testing the waters, but when they saw that nothing bad happened, well, they became more confident. Now they see this money is another source of invasion funding. But what happens if and when the banks do start to experience some troubles? What if clients do start to take money out just to realize there's literally no cash left in the bank? The news will spread fast, more people will become fearful and start taking their own money out of the banks as well, just to find out later that, well, there's absolutely no money left, neither to pay back the people, nor to continue sponsoring the war. So far, the government of Russia maintains the facade of unlimited funding, though many people started asking the right questions, I gotta admit this. To understand why the bluff might soon unravel, think of a medieval fortress throwing lavish feasts to appear unfazed by a siege. Inside, they are eating the last of their grain, gambling on the hope that the enemy will grow tired and leave. In this case, Putin went all in on scaring the West into thinking Russia has an inexhaustible supply of rubles, recruits, and raw materials. He offered absurd pay rises to new volunteers, bought ridiculously overpriced military equipment and ammunition from friendly regimes, and repackaged debt as an eternal fountain of funds. For a time, it worked. Western electorates grumbled at rising energy bills. Politicians questioned whether sanctions were truly hurting Russia. Critics said, look, they're still building new tanks and paying people handsomely. Maybe the war is good for their economy actually. But illusions never survive real scrutiny. As soon as it becomes obvious that these loans will collapse into a gaping hole in bank balance sheets, Russia's facade of resilience will crack. The central bank can raise interest rates to curb the inflation, but that will choke off all other economic sectors. Officials can throw more money at defense contractors, but that means either cutting social programs or printing even more rubles, each step adding even more to the chaos. And as soon as the Western nations realize that this engine is not perpetually fueled, they will lose any reason to rush towards peace on Putin's terms. Well, there you have it, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to my channel. We have once again new merch, Adidas and Russian Dude so-called collaboration with Freedom of Russia regional flag. Very good hats, waterproof, I love them. The link to my store, therussiandude.com, is down below. And as always, thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe